Commander Alan Pierce stood at the bridge of the U.S. Challenger, his eyes fixed on the main screen. Red warning lights flashed across the command center as another blast from the alien ships rocked the vessel. This was humanity's third encounter with the mysterious Zarkax Empire. And like the previous two, it wasn't going well. Shields at 60%. Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes called out from her station, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The enemy ships are circling around for another attack run. Pierce gripped the railing tighter. His ship, along with two other Earth vessels, had been patrolling the outer edges of human space when they encountered the Zarkax patrol. What started as a tense standoff quickly turned into a firefight when the aliens opened fire without warning. "Return fire, all forward batteries," Pierce ordered calmly. "And get me a damage report on the Roosevelt and the Yorktown." Before Hayes could respond, a new alert blared through the bridge. A massive energy signature appeared on their scanners, far larger than anything they had seen before. The crew watched in amazement as a shimmering portal opened in space, and through it emerged a fleet of ships unlike anything humans had ever seen. These new vessels were elegant, almost crystalline in appearance, their hulls gleaming with a pearl-like sheen. They moved with impossible grace, forming a perfect geometric pattern between the human ships and their Zarkax attackers. "We're receiving a transmission," Hayes announced, surprise evident in her voice. "It's being automatically translated into English." A holographic figure materialized on the bridge, tall, ethereal, with 4 arms and silver-blue skin. The being wore ornate robes covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "I am High Counselor Vex Thor of the Galactic Council," the figure announced, its voice resonating with authority. "We have been observing this sector for signs of advanced civilizations. We did not expect to find 2 spacefaring races engaged in combat." Pierce straightened his uniform and stepped forward. "Commander Alan Pierce of the United Earth Fleet, we are defending our territory against unprovoked attacks from the Zarkax Empire." Vex Thor's expression shifted, showing what might have been concern. "The Zarkax are known to us. They have been problematic. But what intrigues us more is your response to their aggression. Your tactics are unlike anything we have observed in our 1,000 years of monitoring developing species." Before Pierce could respond, Admiral Susan Martinez's voice came through the ship's comm system. She had been coordinating the defense from Earth Command and had been patched into the conversation. "High Counselor," Martinez spoke clearly and firmly, "if you've been watching, then you know we're fighting for our survival. The Zarkax have attacked 3 of our colonies in the past month alone." The holographic figure nodded slowly. "Yes, we have observed their pattern of conquest among younger species. What puzzles us is your resistance. Most developing civilizations fall quickly to their assault patterns. Yet you adapt, change tactics, employ what seems to be centuries of battle knowledge in new ways." The bridge crew exchanged glances, what seemed obvious to them. Drawing on humanity's long history of warfare to fight in space was apparently unique among the stars. "Permission to speak freely, High Counselor." Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward, her analytical mind racing with possibilities. When Vex Thor nodded, she continued, "Our species has fought countless wars throughout our history. While we're not proud of this fact, it means we've developed and refined combat strategies for thousands of years. We're simply applying these lessons to space warfare." This statement caused a visible stir among the other council representatives visible in the background of Vex Thor's transmission. They began speaking rapidly in their own language, their gestures animated. "Fascinating," Vex Thor finally said. "The Council's combat doctrine has remained largely unchanged for millennia. We have never considered adapting planetary combat strategies to space warfare. Perhaps this explains why our own efforts to contain the Zarkax expansion have been less than successful." Another blast rocked the ship, reminding everyone that the Zarkax fleet was still present. The enemy ships had regrouped and were preparing for another attack, seemingly undeterred by the Council's presence. "If I may suggest," Pierce said, moving to the tactical display, We can demonstrate some of our defensive strategies right now. With your permission, High Counselor, would the Council fleet be willing to coordinate with us? Vexthor's expression changed to what might have been curiosity. You would share your tactics with us. Freely. Admiral Martinez's voice came through again. We're fighting for our survival, High Counselor. If sharing our military knowledge means gaining allies against the Zarkax, we're willing to do so. We've learned the hard way that going it alone in this galaxy isn't the wisest choice. The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as Pierce and Hayes quickly explained their planned defensive strategy to the Council ships. It was a modified version of an ancient naval warfare technique, adapted for three-dimensional space combat. The human ships would appear to retreat in disarray, drawing the Zarkax into a pursuit, while the Council vessels would hide their energy signatures behind a nearby asteroid field. The plan worked perfectly. The Zarkax ships, confident in their superior numbers, charged after the seemingly fleeing human vessels. When they passed the asteroid field, the Council ships emerged on their flanks, catching them in a classic pincer movement that would have made any ancient admiral proud. The battle was over in minutes. Most of the Zarkax ships retreated through emergency jump points, while two were disabled and captured by the Council fleet. Later, as the human commanders met with the Council representatives aboard their flagship, the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. Humanity had just made first contact with a galactic government, survived another encounter with the Zarkax, and demonstrated the value of their military experience all in one day. Your species has much to teach us, Vexthor announced to the assembled human officers. We propose an exchange. The Council can offer advanced technology and access to the galactic community. In return, we wish to learn your military history and combat strategies. Admiral Martinez stepped forward, extending her hand in the traditional Earth gesture of agreement. We accept, High Counselor. Though I must warn you, humanity's military history is long and often dark. Are you sure you want to learn all of it? Vexthor's four hands clasped Martinez's one in what would become known as the first official handshake between humanity and the Galactic Council. Admiral, in all our millennia of space travel, we have learned that knowledge, even difficult knowledge, is precious. Perhaps it is time for the Council to evolve its own strategies. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it. As Pierce watched the exchange, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. Humanity had worried about making first contact with advanced aliens for centuries, fearing they would be seen as primitive or barbaric due to their warlike history. Instead, that very history might have just earned them a place among the stars. The war with the Zarkax was far from over, but Earth was no longer fighting alone. And as the human officers began sharing their knowledge with the Council's military leaders, it became clear that this was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would change the face of warfare in the galaxy forever. Captain Christopher Blake watched from his command chair as the small fleet of Earth ships powered down their main systems. His vessel, the U.S. Sentinel, drifted silently among the asteroids of the Proxima Centauri belt. 5 other ships lay hidden nearby, their engines cold and their weapons ready. Status report, he whispered into his comm unit, though the Zarkax couldn't possibly hear them through space. All ships in position. Lieutenant Linda Nash replied just as quietly from her science station. The Council observer ships are maintaining their distance. They're confused by our tactics, sir. Blake allowed himself a small smile. Of course they were confused. The Council's massive warships had never tried anything like this before. They believed in direct confrontation, overwhelming force, and strict battle formations. What Blake's team was about to do went against everything they knew about space warfare. Zarkax patrol fleet approaching, Nash announced. 6 heavy cruisers, just as intelligence predicted. They're following their usual patrol route. The bridge crew held their breath as the enemy ships passed near their position. The Zarkax vessels were impressive, each one nearly 3 times the size of Blake's ship, their hulls covered in heavy armor and bristling with weapons. Remember, Blake spoke to his fleet through the secure channel. Just like the old submarine warfare doctrines, we wait for them to pass, then hit them from behind. The minutes crawled by as the Zarkak ships moved through the asteroid field. They were confident, arrogant even, never suspecting that anyone would dare to hide and wait for them. Their sensors swept the area, but thanks to Nash's modified shield frequencies, based on old World War II radar jamming techniques, they detected nothing. Enemy ships have passed our position, Nash reported. They're entering the kill zone. Blake leaned forward in his chair. All ships, power up on my mark. He counted down in his head, timing it perfectly. Mark. 6 human vessels sprang to life simultaneously. The Zarkak ships, caught completely by surprise, didn't even have time to raise their shields before the first volley of torpedoes struck their engines. Hard to port, Blake ordered as his ship swung around an asteroid. Launch second volley, then scatter to secondary positions. The human ships moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, each one striking from a different angle before disappearing behind the asteroids again. The Zarkaks tried to respond, but their large ships were too slow to track the smaller, more agile Earth vessels. From her position aboard the Council observation ship, Commander Katie Rodriguez watched with growing satisfaction as the alien observers frantically took notes and recorded the battle. Remarkable, High Counselor Vexthor said beside her. Your ships move like, what is your Earth term? Guerrilla fighters. Rodriguez nodded. That's exactly what we're doing, High Counselor. Hit-and-run tactics that Earth armies have used for thousands of years. Captain Blake is just applying them to space combat. On the battlefield, the fight was nearly over. 4 Zarkak ships were already drifting powerless, their engines destroyed by the precise torpedo strikes. The remaining 2 were trying to escape, but Blake's ships had positioned themselves to cut off their retreat paths. All ships, execute smoke screen maneuver, Blake commanded. Rodriguez explained to the amazed Council observers as dozens of small drones launched from the human ships, each one releasing a cloud of specialized particles that blocked both visual and sensor readings, a space-age version of an old World War I tactic. The last 2 Zarkak ships, blind and surrounded, had no choice but to surrender. Later, in the debriefing room aboard the Council flagship, Blake and his crew explained their tactics to a group of fascinated alien military leaders. But this is not how space battles are fought. One Council commander protested. Where is the honor in hiding? In striking from shadows. With respect, Linda Nash stepped forward, pulling up tactical displays. Honor means little if your people die. We learned that lesson centuries ago. The goal isn't to fight fairly. It's to win while losing as few lives as possible. She showed them more examples from Earth's military history: guerrilla warfare, asymmetric combat, innovative tactics that had allowed smaller forces to defeat larger ones. The Council members watched in growing understanding as centuries of human military evolution played out before them. There's more, Rodriguez added, joining the presentation. Linda's shield modifications. They're based on techniques our ancestors developed to fool radar systems in World War I. We're not just copying old tactics, we're adapting them for space warfare. The Council's military attaché, an alien named Zexri, spoke up. But surely the Zarkaks will adapt to these tactics. They will learn to expect such attacks. Blake nodded. Of course they will. That's why we're already developing new strategies. In Earth's history, warfare has always been about adaptation and counter-adaptation. The side that adapts faster usually wins. As if to prove his point, alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. A new Zarkak's fleet had arrived, larger this time, and moving in a defensive formation that would have made Blake's previous tactics useless. They're learning, Blake observed calmly. Good thing we have plenty more tricks to teach them. Over the next few hours, the human ships demonstrated another set of tactics, this time based on ancient naval warfare. They used the asteroid field like islands in an archipelago. forcing the larger Zarkak ships into narrow channels where they couldn't maneuver effectively. The Council observers watched in amazement as the smaller human fleet systematically took apart an enemy force 3 times their size, all while suffering minimal damage themselves. "I begin to understand," Vexthor said to Rodriguez as they watched the battle unfold. "Your species doesn't just have different tactics. You have a different way of thinking about warfare entirely. You see possibilities where we see only established protocols." Rodriguez couldn't help but feel proud. "That's the key, High Counselor. We've learned through centuries of warfare that the moment you think you know everything about fighting, that's when you lose. There's always another way, always room for innovation." As the last Zarkak ship surrendered, Blake's voice came over the comm system, addressing both his fleet and the Council observers. "Remember, everyone, this isn't about proving we're better. It's about sharing knowledge that can help us all survive. The Zarkaks are adapting to our tactics, which means we need to keep innovating. And maybe, with the Council's help, we can find new ways of fighting that none of us have thought of yet." The Council members nodded in agreement. The political tension that had initially greeted human military innovations was beginning to fade, replaced by genuine interest and respect. The galaxy was changing, and thanks to humanity's long history of warfare, they were helping to guide that change. As Blake's fleet regrouped for their next mission, Linda Nash was already working on new shield modifications, while Rodriguez prepared to teach another group of Council officers about Earth's military history. The learning curve was steep, but with each battle, each innovation, the combined forces grew stronger. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the Zarkaks were the ones struggling to adapt. And in the great dance of military evolution, that was often the first step toward victory. Amanda Wells stood before the Galactic Council chamber, her heart beating fast, but her voice steady. The Council's great hall stretched up into darkness, with thousands of alien representatives watching from their floating platforms. As Earth's military attaché, she had the difficult task of explaining humanity's approach to warfare to beings who had fought the same way for thousands of years. "Let me show you how humans have fought throughout history," she said, activating the holographic display. The space above her filled with images of ancient battles, modern conflicts, and everything in between. "In just a few thousand years, we went from fighting with spears to splitting atoms," she explained. "We had to adapt quickly because our enemies were always adapting too. This is why we understand the Zarkaks better than you might think." High Counselor Vexthor leaned forward, his 4 arms folded in thought. "Please explain, Ambassador Wells." "The Zarkaks think like Earth's ancient empires did. They believe bigger armies and better weapons always win. But history has shown us that's not true. Strategy and adaptation matter more than size." In orbit above the Council homeworld, General Peter Morrison was putting these principles into action. He stood on the bridge of the U.S. Valiant, watching as human instructors trained Council pilots in new battle formations. "Formation Delta 7, execute," he commanded. The combined fleet moved like a single organism. Small, fast Council ships darted between the larger human vessels, creating an unpredictable defense screen. It was a space version of ancient cavalry and infantry tactics, adapted for 3-dimensional combat. "They're learning quickly," Lieutenant Daniel Carter said from his tactical station. He had spent weeks teaching Council crews how to think more flexibly in battle. An alert flashed across their screens. "Sir," Carter called out. "Zarkak's battle group detected near Rigel. At least 30 ships." Morrison smiled grimly. "Time to show them what our students have learned. All ships, battle stations." The combined human Council fleet jumped to light speed. When they emerged near Rigel, they found the Zarkak's fleet already engaged in attacking a colony world. "Remember your training," Morrison broadcast to all ships. "Smaller vessels, form up behind the human cruisers. Just like we practiced. Ancient Roman testudo formation. Adapted for space." The sight would have amazed any classical military commander. The fleet arranged itself like a giant space turtle, with larger ships forming a shield wall, while faster vessels waited inside the formation for their moment to strike. The Zarkax, expecting the Council's traditional head-on assault, had spread their ships in a wide battle line. They weren't prepared for what happened next. "Carter, show them that asteroid trick you developed," Morrison ordered. Carter grinned and activated the fleet's gravity generators. They had spent weeks practicing this technique. The human ships launched special probes into a nearby asteroid field, using them to change the rock's gravitational properties. Suddenly, hundreds of asteroids began moving like guided missiles, creating a chaotic field of flying rocks that the Zarkax had to dodge. While the enemy was distracted, the combined fleet split into smaller attack groups, just as ancient armies would break into smaller units to surround their opponents. "Council Group Alpha, take the left flank," Morrison commanded. "Council Group Beta, right flank. Human ships will punch through the center." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Council ships, finally freed from their rigid battle doctrine, demonstrated amazing skill with their new tactics. They darted between asteroids, used gravity wells as weapons, and coordinated perfectly with their human allies. The Zarkax tried to adjust, but they faced an enemy that fought in ways they couldn't predict. When they concentrated their fire on the large ships, swarms of smaller vessels struck their flanks. When they spread out to defend against the swarms, the large ships punched through their weakened center. "Enemy fleet is in disarray," Carter reported with satisfaction. "They're retreating." As the Zarkax ships fled the battlefield, Morrison received a transmission from the Council's military headquarters. The alien leaders had watched the entire battle, and they had finally made a decision that would change the course of the war. Back in the Council chamber, Amanda Wells listened as Vexthor made the announcement. "We have witnessed enough. The Council hereby formally adopts human military doctrine as our standard for space combat training. Ambassador Wells, we request that Earth establish a joint military academy to teach these principles to all Council species." Wells bowed respectfully. "We would be honored, High Counselor. But remember, this is just the beginning. The Zarkax will study our tactics and try to counter them. We must keep innovating." "How can we innovate on thousands of years of human warfare?" one Council member asked. "By combining our knowledge," Wells replied. "You have technologies we've only dreamed of. We have military strategies you've never considered. Together, we can create entirely new ways of fighting." To demonstrate her point, she showed them the next phase of human Council military development. Scientists from both civilizations were already working on combining Council energy weapons with human tactical principles. Engineers were designing new ships that could switch between Council and human battle formations. "The Zarkax believe that warfare is about power," she concluded. "We understand that it's really about adaptation. They fight to conquer. We fight to survive. That's why we'll win, not because we're stronger, but because we never stop learning and changing." As if to prove her words, reports began coming in from across the galaxy. The Zarkax, frustrated by their losses, had changed their tactics. They were now attacking civilian targets, hoping to force a conventional battle. Instead of panic, the news was met with determination. In orbit, Morrison's fleet began practicing new defensive formations. In the Council chamber, Wells started organizing classes on protecting civilian populations, drawing on humanity's long and bitter experience with such warfare. "They think this will make us fight conventionally," Morrison told his fleet. "Instead, we'll teach them why threatening civilians is a mistake. Throughout human history, nothing has inspired military innovation more than the need to protect our people." The Council members, watching human ships run protection drills with their own vessels, finally understood why this young species had survived so many wars. Humans didn't just study warfare. They learned from it, adapted it, and most importantly, they never stopped trying to find better ways to fight. As the combined fleet prepared for their next battle, Wells received a message from Earth. The first class of council officers had begun training at the newly established Joint Species Combat Academy. Among the training materials were texts ranging from Sun Tzu's Art of War to modern military theory, all adapted for species that had never imagined warfare could be so complex. The war was entering a new phase. The Zarkaks were about to learn that threatening civilians wouldn't weaken their enemies. It would only make them more determined to win. And with humans teaching the Council how to fight creatively, victory was no longer a question of if, but when. Major Richard Edwards crouched behind a fallen pillar in the Earth military archives, his laser rifle held tight against his chest. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the dark halls as Zarkak's commandos searched the building. They had come for Earth's military history, desperate to understand how humans fought. "Status report," he whispered into his comm unit. "Archives core is sealed," came the quiet reply from Sergeant Amy Parker. "All digital records are safe. They're after the physical books and documents now." Edwards smiled grimly. The Zarkaks didn't understand that Earth's military knowledge wasn't just in books. It was in the minds and training of every soldier. Still, they couldn't let the enemy steal these historical documents. "Team 2, are you in position?" he asked. "Ready and waiting." Barbara Mitchell responded from her position in the building's engineering section. As the Council's chief engineer assigned to Earth, she had spent weeks studying ancient Roman defensive formations. Now she was about to use that knowledge in a very modern way. The Zarkaks commandos moved closer, their heavy armor clanking against the marble floor. They looked like walking tanks, covered in thick plates, and carrying weapons bigger than a human arm. But Edwards knew that bigger didn't always mean better. "Now, Mitchell," he ordered. Barbara activated her modified shield generators. Just like the Roman testudo formation protected soldiers with overlapping shields, her devices created overlapping energy fields throughout the building. The Zarkaks suddenly found themselves trapped between invisible walls of force. "All teams, execute," Edwards commanded. Human and Council security forces emerged from hiding spots around the archives. They moved in perfect coordination, using the shield barriers as cover just like ancient soldiers used their physical shields. The Zarkaks, trapped in small groups by the energy fields, couldn't use their superior numbers effectively. In orbit above Earth, Captain Andrew Phillips watched the space battle unfold. The Zarkaks had sent a fleet to support their ground forces, but they had fallen right into the humans' trap. Enemy fleet approaching in standard attack formation, his tactical officer reported. "They're following the exact path we predicted." Phillips nodded. "Just like old naval warfare, they're following the channels we left open for them. Launch Operation Trafalgar." His fleet had hidden themselves behind Earth's moon, using a technique based on 18th century naval tactics. Just as sailing ships once used islands and coastlines for surprise attacks, the human ships now used celestial bodies to mask their movements. The Zarkaks fleet, focused on reaching Earth, didn't notice the danger until it was too late. Phillips's ships emerged from behind the moon, catching the enemy in a perfect crossfire. They had adapted the ancient naval tactic of crossing the T for space warfare, positioning their ships to fire full broadsides, while the enemy could only use their forward weapons. Back in the archives, Edwards and his team were pushing the Zarkaks commandos back. The aliens' powerful weapons were useless against the overlapping shields, while the humans and their Council allies used precisely aimed shots to disable their armor. "They're retreating to their landing ships," Parker reported excitedly. "Don't let them escape with any documents," Edwards ordered. "We need to show them that attacking our history only makes us use it better." Barbara Mitchell's voice came over the comm. "Major, I've got an idea based on an old castle defense tactic. Permission to improvise." "Granted," Edwards replied immediately. This was what humans did best: adapt and improvise. Mitchell redirected power to the shield generators in a new pattern. Just as medieval castles used gatehouses to trap attackers, she created a series of energy corridors that forced the retreating Zarkaks into killing zones. Within minutes, the remaining commandos surrendered. In space, Phillips's fleet had achieved similar success. The Zarkak ships, caught in the trap, were trying to retreat. But the human captain had one more historical lesson to teach them. Launch Operation Salamis, he commanded, naming his maneuver after an ancient Greek naval battle. His ships split into smaller groups, herding the enemy fleet toward a field of secretly planted space mines. Just as the Greek triremes once forced Persian ships onto hidden underwater obstacles, the human fleet now pushed the Zarkaks into a trap that would end the battle. Hours later, Edward stood in the cleaned-up archives with High Counselor Vexthor, who had come to inspect the damage personally. The Zarkaks thought they could steal our military knowledge, Edwards explained, picking up an ancient book about the Battle of Thermopylae. They don't understand that our strength isn't in these documents. It's in how we learn from them and adapt their lessons. Vexthor nodded thoughtfully. We have noticed that humans never simply copy old tactics. You take the principles behind them and create something new. Exactly, Barbara Mitchell added, joining them. Look at how we use the Roman testudo today. The Romans never imagined energy shields, but the principle of overlapping protection remains the same. In orbit, Phillips was explaining similar concepts to a group of council commanders. He showed them how Earth's naval history had provided the framework for space combat strategies that the Zarkaks couldn't predict. The key is understanding the principles behind the tactics, he explained. Don't just copy what worked before. Understand why it worked and how to apply that knowledge to new situations. The council commanders were quick learners. Already, they were suggesting ways to combine their advanced technology with human tactical principles. One proposed using their gravity generators to recreate ancient naval maneuvers in 3 dimensions. Another suggested applying old guerrilla warfare techniques to asteroid field combat. As the day ended, Edwards received a report that made him smile. The Zarkaks attack had failed completely. Not a single historical document had been lost. More importantly, the battle had taught the Earth Council Alliance new ways to combine old and new combat techniques. They tried to steal our history, he told his teams during the debriefing. Instead, they made us demonstrate why that history matters. Every attack they make teaches us something new about combining past and present warfare. The council members present nodded in agreement. They had finally understood why humans were so effective in combat. It wasn't just about knowing military history. It was about understanding it deeply enough to adapt it to any situation. As night fell over the archives, Edwards walked through the repaired halls, touching the spines of books that contained centuries of military knowledge. The Zarkaks had thought they could gain Earth's strength by stealing these documents. What they didn't understand was that Earth's real strength lay in its ability to learn, adapt, and evolve. The war was reaching a crucial phase. The Zarkaks, frustrated by their failures, would soon try something desperate. But thanks to their failed raid, the Earth Council Alliance was stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next with the combined wisdom of human history and alien technology. Commander Michelle Turner stood at the center of Earth's combined fleet command, surrounded by holograms showing thousands of ships, both human and council vessels. After months of preparation, the final battle was about to begin. The Zarkaks had gathered their entire remaining fleet for one last attempt to defeat the Earth Council Alliance. All ships report ready, her executive officer announced. Operation Normandy is go. Turner smiled at the operation's name. Just like the historic D-Day invasion, this battle would use deception and misdirection on a massive scale. The Zarkaks thought they knew where the attack would come from. They were wrong. Begin Phase 1, she ordered. Launch the decoy fleet. In space, hundreds of unmanned ships appeared to jump into battle near the Zarkaks' position. They were holographic projections mixed with a few real automated vessels, creating the illusion of a massive assault force. Just as World War II forces had used inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic to fool their enemies, the Alliance now used advanced technology to create a space-age deception. "The enemy is taking the bait," reported Admiral John Harrison from his position with the real fleet, hidden behind a nearby nebula. "They're moving to engage the decoys." The Zarkak's fleet, nearly 3,000 ships strong, moved to meet what they thought was the main human council attack. Their formation was perfect for fighting the wrong battle. All carriers, launch fighters, Turner commanded. Lieutenant Laura Foster, the first human instructor at the new Joint Species Combat Academy, led the fighter squadrons. Her pilots were a mix of humans and various council species, all trained in Earth's combat techniques. "Remember your training," Foster transmitted to her pilots. "Just like the old dogfighters of Earth's past, use your speed and maneuverability. Make them chase you." The real battle began when Harrison's fleet emerged from the nebula, catching the Zarkaks from behind. The enemy tried to turn their ships around, but they had fallen for the trap completely. Their tight formation, perfect for facing a frontal assault, now made them vulnerable to attacks from multiple directions. "Execute Phase 2, Turner ordered. Foster's fighters struck first, darting between the larger enemy ships like ancient cavalry between infantry formations. They targeted engines and weapons systems with precise strikes, creating chaos in the Zarkak's ranks. "Council Group Alpha, move in," Harrison commanded. Just like we practiced. The council ships, now experts in human tactics, performed perfectly. Their energy weapons created patterns of fire that forced the Zarkak ships into predictable escape routes, right where Turner's main fleet waited. "They're trying to regroup," Foster reported as her fighters continued their harassment attacks. "Looks like they're finally figuring out it's a trap." Turner nodded. "Too late. Begin Phase 3, Operation Rising Sun." This was the most complex part of the plan. Based on ancient Pacific naval warfare tactics, multiple battle groups attacked simultaneously from different directions, overwhelming the enemy's ability to respond effectively. The Zarkaks found themselves fighting in every direction, unable to establish a defensive line. In the command center, High Counselor Vexthor watched in amazement. "The coordination between our forces, it's perfect," he said. "Your people have taught us well." "We learned from each other," Turner replied. "Your technology and our tactics together make an unbeatable combination." The battle continued for hours. The Zarkaks fought bravely, but they were facing an enemy that had revolutionized space warfare. Every time they adapted to one tactic, the Alliance would switch to another. When they spread out to counter the fighter attacks, the capital ships would punch through their lines. When they grouped together for protection, they would be surrounded and picked apart. "Enemy fleet is down to 40% strength," Harrison reported. "Their formation is breaking up." Foster's voice came over the comm. "We're seeing escape pods launching. Multiple Zarkak ships are powering down their weapons." "Send the message," Turner ordered. The transmission went out in all languages. "To all Zarkak's forces, your defeat is inevitable. Surrender now, and you will be treated with respect according to galactic law. Continue fighting, and you will face the combined might of humanity and the Council." The response came within minutes. The Zarkak's Supreme Commander himself appeared on the main screen. His once proud bearing was gone, replaced by the look of someone who had finally understood they were outmatched. "We request terms of surrender," he said quietly. Hours later, Turner stood with Foster, Harrison, and Vexthor in the Council's Great Hall. The formal surrender had been signed, ending a war that had changed the galaxy forever. "The Joint Species Combat Academy will be expanded," Vexthor announced. "Lieutenant Foster, we would be honored if you would continue as lead instructor." Foster bowed slightly. "I would be proud to, High Counselor. But remember, we're not just teaching combat. We're teaching adaptation, innovation, and the importance of learning from history." "Speaking of history," Harrison added, "we're already working on combining the military histories of all Council species with Earth's records. There's so much we can learn from each other." Turner looked out at the celebration beginning in the streets below. Humans and aliens mingled freely, sharing stories, and celebrating together. The war had brought them closer than anyone could have imagined. The Zarkaks thought they could defeat us because they had more ships and bigger weapons, she said. They never understood that warfare isn't about size or strength. It's about wisdom, adaptation, and working together. What will happen to them now? Foster asked. Vexthor spread his 4 arms in a gesture of peace. They will be welcomed back into the galactic community. Once they have proven they can live in peace, perhaps they too will learn from this experience. They already have, Harrison said. During the surrender ceremony, their commander asked if they could send students to the academy. They want to learn why they were defeated. Turner smiled. The future would bring new challenges, but the Alliance would face them together. Humanity had shared its military knowledge with the galaxy, and in return, they had gained friends and allies among the stars. As the celebration continued, Foster gathered her first class of new cadets, humans and aliens together, ready to learn from each other. The war was over, but the learning would never end. That, perhaps, was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not just the knowledge of how to fight, but the understanding that there was always more to learn.